And we're going to continue with the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Mystery of Marie Rogêt. Again, as it is so old, over 170 years, we need to unpack what we just read. So several newspapers have written articles about the murder of this woman, how possibly she was murdered by a gang of people, possibly that she's still alive, hanging out with friends somewhere, and her friends found out about the body and decided to say it was her. And then an article broke that some boys found possibly the spot of the murder. They found some of Marie Rogêt's clothes and some handkerchiefs, and we will pick up from there. Consequent upon this discovery, new evidence appeared. Madame Dulac testified that she keeps a roadside inn not far from the bank of the river opposite the Barrière des Roues. The neighborhood is secluded, particularly so. It is the usual Sunday resort of blackguards from the city who cross the river in boats. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon of the Sunday in question, a young girl arrived at the inn, accompanied by a young man of dark complexion. The two remained here for some time. On their departure, they took the road to some thick woods in the vicinity. Madame Dulac's attention was called to the dress worn by the girl. On account of its resemblance to one worn by a deceased relative, a scarf was particularly noticed. Soon after the departure of the couple, a gang of miscreants made their appearance, behaved boisterously, ate and drank without making payment, followed in the route of the young man and girl, returned to the inn about dusk, and recrossed the river as if in great haste. It was soon after dark upon this same evening that Madame Dulac, as well as her eldest son, heard the screams of a female in the vicinity of the inn. The screams were violent but brief. Madame D. recognized not only the scarf which was found in the thicket, but the dress which was discovered upon the corpse. An omnibus driver, Valence, now also testified that he saw Marie Rogêt cross a ferry on the Seine on the Sunday in question, in company with a young man of dark complexion. He, Valence, knew Marie, and could not be mistaken in her identity. The articles found in the thicket were fully identified by the relatives of Marie. The items of evidence and information thus collected by myself from the newspapers at the suggestion of Dupin embraced only one more point, but this was a point of seemingly vast consequence. It appears that immediately after the discovery of the clothes above described, the lifeless or nearly lifeless body of Saint Eustace, Marie's betrothed, was found in the vicinity of what all now suppose to be the scene of the outrage. A phial labeled laudanum was emptied and found near him. His breath gave evidence of the poison. He died without speaking. Upon his person was found a letter, briefly stating his love for Marie, with his design for self-destruction. I need scarcely tell you, said Dupin, as he finished the perusal of my notes, that this is a far more intricate case than that of the Rue Morgue, from which it differs in one important respect. This is an ordinary, although atrocious instance of crime. There is nothing particularly outré about it. You will observe that, for this reason, the mystery has been considered easy, when, for this reason, it should have been considered difficult of solution. Thus, at first, it was thought unnecessary to offer a reward. The Marauders of G were unable at once to comprehend how and why such an atrocity might have been committed. They could picture to their imaginations a mode, many modes, and motive, many motives, and because it was not impossible that either of these numerous modes and motives could have been the actual one, they have taken it for granted that one of them must. But the ease with which these variable fancies were entertained, and the very plausibility which each assumed, should have been understood as indicative rather of the difficulties than of the facilities which must attend elucidation. I have before observed that it is by prominences above the plane of the ordinary, that reason feels her way, if at all, in her search for the true, and that the proper question in cases such as this is not so much what has occurred as what has occurred that has never occurred before. In the investigations of the house of Madame l'Espagne, the agents of G were discouraged and confounded by the very unusualness which, to a properly regulated intellect, would have afforded a surest omen of success, where the same intellect might have plunged to despair at the ordinary caricature of all that met the eye in the case of a perfumery girl, and yet told of nothing but easy triumph to the functions of a prefecture. In the case of Madame l'Espagne and her daughter, there was, even at the beginning of our investigations, no doubt that murder had been committed. The idea of suicide was elucidated at once. Here, too, we are freed at the commencement from all supposition of self-murder. The body found at the Barrière des Roues was found under such circumstances as to leave us no room for embarrassment upon this important point. But it has been suggested that the corpse discovered is not that of Marie Rogêt, for the conviction of whose assassin or assassins the reward is offered, and respecting whom solely our agreement has been arranged with the prefect. We both know this gentleman well. It will not do to trust him too far. If, dating our inquiries from the body found, and thence tracing a murderer, we yet discover this body to be that of some other individual than Marie, or if, starting from the living Marie, we find her unassassinated, in either case we lose our labor, since it is Monsieur G with whom we have to deal. For our own purpose, therefore, if not for the purpose of justice, it is indispensable that our first step should be the determination of the identity of the corpse with the Marie Rogêt who is missing, with the public arrangements of l'Étoile have had weight, and that the journal itself is convinced of their importance would appear from the manner in which it commences one of its essays upon this subject. Several of the morning papers of today, it says, speak of the conclusive article in Monday's Étoile. To me, the article appears conclusive of little beyond the zeal of its indicator. We should bear in mind that, in general, it is the object of our newspapers rather to create a sensation, to make a point, than to further the cause of truth. The latter end is only pursued when it seems coincident with the former. The print, which merely falls in with ordinary option, however well-founded this opinion may be, earns for itself no credit with the mob. The mass of people regards as profound only him who suggests pungent contradictions of the general idea. In ratio syntation, not less than in literature, it is the epigram which is the most immediate and most universally appreciated. In both, it is the lowest order of merit. And what I mean to say is that it is the mingled epigram and the melodrama of the idea, that Marie Rogêt still lives, rather than any true plausibility in the idea, which have suggested it to l'Étoile and secured a favorable reception with the public. Let us examine the heads of this journal's argument, endeavoring to avoid the incoherence with which it is originally set forth. The first aim for the writer is to show, from the brevity of the interval between Marie's disappearance and the finding of the floating corpse, that this corpse cannot be that of Marie. The reduction of the interval to its smaller possible dimension becomes thus at once an object with the reasoner. In the rash pursuit of this object, he rushes into mere assumption at the outset. It is folly to suppose, he says, that the murder, if murder was committed on her body, could have been consummated soon enough to have enabled her murderers to throw the body into the river before midnight. We demand at once and very naturally, why? Why is it folly to suppose that the murder was committed within 5 minutes after the girl's quitting her mother's house? Why is it folly to suppose that the murder was committed at any given period of the day? There have been assassinations at all hours, but had the murder taken place at any moment between 9 o'clock in the morning of Sunday and at a quarter before midnight, there would still have been time enough to throw the body into the river before midnight. This assumption, then, amounts precisely to this, that the murder was not committed on Sunday at all, and if we allow Leetole to assume this, we may permit it any liberties whatever. The paragraph beginning, "It is folly to suppose that the murder, etc., however it appears as printed in Leetole, may be imagined to have existed actually thus in the brain of its indicator. It is folly to suppose that the murder, if the murder was committed on the body, could have been committed soon enough to have enabled her murderers to throw the body into the river before midnight. It is folly, we say, to suppose all this, and to suppose at the same time, as we are resolved to suppose, that the body was not thrown in until after midnight, a sentence sufficiently inconsequential in itself, but not so utterly preposterous as the one printed." "Were it my purpose," continued Dupin, "merely to make out a case against this passage of Leetole's argument, I might safely leave it where it is. It is not, however, with Etole that we have to do, but with the truth. The sentence in question has but one meaning as it stands, and this meaning, I have fairly stated, but it is material that we go beyond the mere words. For an idea which these words have obviously intended and failed to convey, it was the design of the journalist to say that, at whatever period of the day or night of Sunday this murder was committed, it was improbable that assassins would have ventured to bear the corpse to the river before midnight, and herein lies really the assumption of which I complain. It is assured that this murder was committed at such a position and under such circumstances that the bearing it to the river became necessary. Now, the assassination might have taken place upon the river's brink, or on the river itself, and thus the throwing of the corpse in the water might have been resorted to at any period of the day or night, and the most obvious and the most immediate mode of disposal. As the most obvious and the most immediate mode of disposal, you will understand that I suggest nothing here as probable or as coincident with my own opinions. My design, so far, has no reference to the facts of the case. I wish merely to caution you against the whole tone of Leetole's suggestion by calling your attention to the ex parte character at the outset. And there we will pause.